Good morning, people. I see I've got a couple of people joining us now. Good morning, Shona. Thank you for joining us. Um, I'm just waiting a few minutes for others to join us. Hopefully, you can hear me. Uh, so, just a couple of people have already told me that they can't make it this morning because things have cropped up, and that's okay. Um, if things crop up over the next 45 minutes and you need to exit, that's okay. But just leave some questions behind in the chat box, and what I'll do is I'll prepare a document or a video to address those questions for you, and I'll send it to you personally by email. Um, yeah, so things happen during the day, and it's okay if you're not able to make it um, through the whole training session. Okay, so we've got a couple more. Check my. Cool. All right. All right. So I think I don't know if any of you have uh, some some questions you want to ask first, because you can just chuck that into the chat box, and then I'll address it as we get further along. But that's okay if you don't either. Good morning. We've got a couple more people joining us. Good morning. So we'll just start in a couple of minutes here. I hope you've got a nice cup of coffee with you. It's pretty muggy out there. I hope you're all doing well and weren't affected by the uh, COVID shenanigans. All right, starting in about a minute. Good morning. All right, let's get into it. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. And look, thank you so much for taking some time out of your very busy days. I know that you guys work extremely hard, and I'm eternally grateful for all the teachers at Northern Health Schools for the amazing work that you do. I know that you have a few of my patients, and they're not easy. So thank you very much for your help. I think your contribution has made a world of difference to their lives, and certainly I appreciate it, and their families appreciate it as well. So this morning, um, I would like to share a little bit of my experience and knowledge of kids with social reading difficulties, in particular kids with autistic spectrum disorder, as you know, struggle with this quite a bit. And the reason why I wanted to share some of this with you is because it's quite close to my heart. So I'm a youth forensic psychiatrist by training, and what that means is that my training involved looking after children and adolescents who get into trouble with the law. And we got sent a lot of kids with um, a whole range of difficulties. And one of those problems that we discovered that was very difficult to address because there was a lack of resource were those kids with autistic spectrum disorder who got into trouble with the law. And so you can imagine the frustration and exasperation that us clinicians would come up against. Um, we had so many kids that had autistic spectrum disorder with no specific place to go for intervention that we had to set up our own sorts of treatment protocols for them. But once they left the justice system, they would fall between the cracks. And working with them, I learned a great deal about both ASD. Good morning, people. There's some more people popping into the live training now. Um, and So I learned a great deal about autistic spectrum disorder, but also empathy. And most importantly, this might come as a bit of a surprise, but the need to be self-aware when working with people with ASD, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I'll explain more as I go along. So just a little bit of an outline of what we'll cover today. Um, One, I'll be covering some broad ideas that I hope you can put into practice fairly immediately. And then I'm going to talk about the idea of empathy in the context of autistic spectrum disorder. Again, because it's topical, I get asked about it a lot, and it confounds a lot of people. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can help. So the other thing is, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Practice of Empathic Discipline course, which is going to be discounted for webinar attendees. And you're under no obligation to buy, of course, because the free stuff is going to be, pretty good as well. But stay till the end if you want to hear about the special offer I have for you. The first 45 minutes is going to be didactic teaching. Um, and then I've left about 15 minutes spare at the end for Q&A. We might go over a little bit, we might be under, but that's okay. And I said before, people might pop in and out of the training. And for those who need to exit because of pressing matters, please do leave your questions in the chat box. And what I'll do is I'll address those questions, perhaps in a separate document or a video for you, um, just so that you're not missing out. Okay, so I think the first thing to do is just to address some misconceptions about ASD and empathy. So a lot of people, and clinicians included, have this idea that folks with ASD can't empathize. And that's, of course, not accurate. It's not entirely true. Um, it's not so much that they are unable to empathize. It's more that the difficulty comes when they're having to process information that they receive from the environment within their vicinity. Um, if you have kids with so-called sensory processing disorder, it's a good example because the example is so stark. As you know, if you've worked with kids with sensory processing disorder, which is in fact just an offshoot of ASD, um, they have a very difficult time processing stimulus from the environment. It's almost as though everything around them is highly, highly sensitized. So when they receive information from stimulus, it's very intense. It's almost like sitting in a white room with the Kardashians playing in the background. And then you've got Lady Gaga playing at the same time, Poker Face over and over and over again at full volume. And then you've got scratchy linen clothes. The air conditioning's turned on to full bore, either too hot or too cold. You imagine staying in that white room for a very long time. And the reason why I'm describing it like this is because I had one young man describe his sensory processing problems like this. And that sounds awful. Um, I'm sorry if you like the Kardashians or Lady Gaga, but you can imagine it's hell. It's horror. And so that might give you a little bit of a sense of what some kids with SPD go through, but equally what kids with ASD go through. No wonder some of them have to put on headphones in order to drown out the noise, which seems a little bit strange because uh, there's not a lot of obvious disturbance in the environment. But to them, because they're highly tuned in, and sensitized, it's very difficult for them to filter out information. And that goes the same as well for other sorts of information like emotional information, um, language, touch, what they see, what they hear. And so it's very difficult for kids with ASD and indeed adults with ASD to make sense of what is salient information and what's not salient information. So, what information is important to pay attention to, what information is not important to pay attention to. For those kids who are more self aware, they very well know that they struggle with this. And it feels like they just don't understand people. They just can't seem to get it, and they know that. And you can see that in some of those kids who get labeled as loners. Um, they're early, when they're younger, they may not struggle um, as much. You know, their struggles are not as apparent because they're all on the same level in terms of social skill and emotional development. But it's until they grow older when differences start to show compared to more developmentally typical children, um, and then the difficulties start to become more apparent. It can be very difficult, of course, for teachers and parents to watch um, because you're in the trenches. You're trying to help them navigate through complex social situations. Um, it's very difficult. I'm sure I don't have to tell you folks at NHS about this. I'm sure you experience this a lot, and you see kids go through episodes of distress because they just can't make sense of what's going on in their environment or what's going on in their social situations. So you're in the trenches trying to help them figure all this stuff out. How do we help them navigate minefields in life? One of the frustrations I found is when working with kids with ASD, sometimes I would get so frustrated that I would explicitly tell them about landmines in front of them, hoping that that would help them to figure out where the other landmines are in front of them. But they don't seem to, uh, they, the information they get from me doesn't generalize very well, and they keep landing on landmines. Um, and they repeat that over and over again, much to the chagrin of, all the clinicians. But it was only until much later when I realized the flaw in our process. It and I'll come to that soon if you bear with me. And that's the key, I think, to helping them uh, empathize with other people and recognizing what information is important and what information is not. What is that thing? I will tell you. I promise. Uh, So before I do that, I think it's fairly obvious to most of you who know me that my bias is towards empathic, client-centered approaches to interventions in mental health and emotional challenges. The reason is because there's no one-size-fits-all intervention that suits all emotional problems. That was one of the difficulties that we fell into in the public sector. Um, that it was very difficult to structure intervention programs that would align with service policies. So, for example, if we wanted to work with a kid for much longer than we thought we needed, it was, we would come up against obstacles, or sometimes we would argue for the need for low um, caseloads so that we could work more attentively to those kids that needed the most help. In the private sector, it's a bit easier, but there's still limits to that, of course. Um, Being able to understand or at least appreciate another person's thoughts, feelings, certainly unlocks the capacity to problem solve creatively. So one can do that for oneself, like a clinician or a teacher, but how that translates over into the real world, um, and when you're actually working with someone with ASD, one on one, it's fine, but when you try and spread that out across the rest of the system, it becomes a little bit challenging. But I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. Um, some of the other benefits of being able to appreciate how others think and feel is, of course, you also start to appreciate what they value and what they believe. You also start to appreciate their motivations and their objectives. You start to understand their grasp of reality, what they think is real, what they think is not real, and also their perception of others. It's important to understand that empathy is not sympathy or pity. Neither does it mean that you agree or condone certain behaviors. In many ways, it's more akin to insight, but insight has its limitations as well. For example, you could have insight into someone's um, headspace, but it doesn't always mean that the right thing gets done. I still think that there's positive potential for insight and empathy, of course. Uh, how accurate our insight is, how accurate we are with our empathy, depends on the quality of the information that we have. And how we collect that information is really important, which again feeds into what I'm going to share with you very, very soon. The key thing that is important here. Empathy is also twofold. Not only does it help you understand another person's perspectives, but it also improves the relationship that you have with the other person. Because when you're able to to sink in with another person, that builds trust. And once you build trust, it mitigates apprehensions that the other person will have towards you, hostility, and it increases the likelihood that you can gain cooperation with you. So it's almost like you can imagine like a sterile sterile barrier between you and your interlocutor. Nothing gets through. Um, so the reason for that is because the person on the other side wants to protect their space. But if the interlocutor, the person across the sterile space, feels that you're sterile yourself because you're like them, because you've understood them, and therefore this sets up the sense of likeness, that sterile barrier becomes more porous, which then allows room for fluid exchange of information. What information is that? Emotional information, things that they guard close to their heart, for example. I have to be careful not to not to stray into the province of philosophy here, but I'll try and keep on track here. So okay, so where am I at now? Right. So um, what I'm going to do is I'll just pause here and say that many of these concepts I delve into in more depth in the Practice of Empathic Discipline course, um, which I will talk about at the end of this session. And for webinar attendees, there's a special offer which I'll give to you, which you're under no obligation to go and buy, of course, because I want you to enjoy the free stuff as well and use the free stuff. Um, so uh, we've now come to the core principle of what I'm going to want to share with you. So empathy, as I said before, frames all the interventions that we should be employing with kids with neuroatypical conditions. At a foundational level, accurate empathy for another person rests on two components. At a foundational level, there's a cognitive, a thinking component, and an affective or a feeling, perceptive component. The better able you're the better able you can understand those two components and how those two gel together, the stronger will be your connection with the other person. It sounds esoteric, but please bear with me. Think about your BFF, your best friend or someone that you're really, really close to. Think about those times when you have been really in sync with one another. You feel like you just get each other. It's almost as though you're on the same wavelength. And that's because something fundamentally uh, something's happening between the exchange, which is activating both your mirror neurons. And what's happening there is that you're able to understand each other's affective and cognitive components and how those two link together. You share the same space, so to speak. The greater the congruence and the alignment, the greater a sense of trust you will establish within that relationship. And that's what we're trying to achieve with kids with ASD. And that's what we want them to try and learn as well. So, an example of how um, this doesn't work out very well is when you come across someone who tells you that they're happy or sad, but you know that they're not quite happy or sad. There's something jarring about the message. Um, something doesn't quite fit either in their facial expression or their body language. There are these offbeat notes that you are able to catch. Um, Kids with ASD, like I said before, because they get this um, flood of information coming to them without the ability to tag information in a way that allows them to prioritize and to distinguish between what's important and what's not. Information that's body language, information that's um, language information, it's very hard um, to determine what's important and what's not. And so then it's very difficult for them to pick up off beats. And so they make fundamental errors in judgment by not recognizing those off beats. Um, and if you're an adult, if you're a man, a husband, I'm a husband, I get that wrong as well. But you can appreciate that kids with ASD who are not able to sense those off beats will, of course, get into trouble socially, and that becomes more obvious as they get older. So children with ASD are much more likely to accept things people say at face value um, without being able to tune in to the incongruence between what is thought and what is felt. And there's a neurobiological basis for that. Um, so, how we filter social and emotional information um, is a little bit wonky. So, it's not a problem with the sensors. There's nothing wrong with the sensors, clearly, because they're sensing all this information. It's the filtration and the sieving through of that information and sorting it out that's the problem. So it's not the hardware, it's the software that's the issue. So we have to help them reprogram and recalibrate their software. Think about emotions like colors. Um, like the primary colors, blue, green, red, yellow, akin to what I like to call primary emotions like anger, sadness, happiness. But there are much more complex colors, as you know. Um, and it's much more difficult to appreciate different shades of colors like turquoise or teal. Um, for some people, turquoise is green. For people like me, I've got no interior design knowledge at all, so it looks like blue to me. But it apparently it's closer to green, I think. Anyway, people with ASD struggle to make sense of shades of colors, shades of emotion like envy, shame, disgust, excitement, etc. So kids with ASD, sometimes I like to say, are colorblind in a sense. So social pictures that they paint can be quite monochromic. And over time, neurotypical kids, what they do is they start to um, paint social pictures uh, with more elaborate colors. And the pictures might not, so the pictures are representations of the world that they've internalized, which helps them to then deal with future situations because they have a model for how the world works based on what they've experienced. Now, with kids with ASD, because they are so called colorblind, and those social pictures that they paint when they're younger are monochromic, and because they have a hard time seeing shades of color, shades of emotion, they're going to continue painting in a monochromic way. And so as they get older, those social pictures never become as elaborate or as nuanced as kids without ASD who can paint in more nuanced ways. Many clinicians focus on teaching children with ASD how others paint, how others feel and think. That's an honest and reasonable, and it is necessary effort, but kids with ASD still won't be able to connect with that because kids with ASD struggle to understand what they feel and think and how they feel and think and how that connects with one another. So that's the thing. Self awareness correlates highly with empathic skill and social reading skills. So, what me and my team started doing when we were working with kids with ASD is instead of trying to focus on what other people were feeling and thinking and teaching kids what their victims were feeling and thinking, we would try and teach them more about themselves, about how they were feeling and thinking. And I remember doing these so called empathy maps. I don't know if you know what empathy maps is, but maps are. I think it's borrowed from UX designers, um, sort of user experience designers, trying to get a better sense of their customers' needs. And what they would do is they would sit down with a customer and draw up an empathy map and ask them how they felt about a product, what they saw, what they heard, what they thought they um, were feeling at the time they were using the product. Anyway, you can download these empathy maps off places like Pinterest, but we would use them in session with our youth offenders, kids with ASD who were about to be released from the Justice Department into the ether. um, we would try and teach them at least um, some tools of how to become more self aware. The idea being that if you could be more self aware of your own feelings and thoughts, that would then help you to paint social pictures with less monochromaticism. So you could be more nuanced with how you paint social pictures, which then would allow you to extrapolate those pictures into other people's worlds when you're going forward, interacting with other people around you. Because let's face it, it's impossible for us to truly know how other people feel and think. We might be able to appreciate how other people feel and think, but how do we do that? We do that because we use our own experiences as reference points. And over time, we color things in with a bit more nuance as we learn and experience from other people as well, and what we hear, what we see, what we feel, what we think. Um, and that's what we want to try and do with kids with ASD. We need them to become more self-aware. I'm sure you've noticed that kids with ASD um, struggle with self-awareness. And to me, that's the key point here. I think that should be the focus of most of our interventions. It's to improve their self-awareness. And I know that many of you already do this intuitively because I think many of you, I'm sure I won't name names, but those who I've worked with at NHS seem to have this intuitive um, uh, ability to empathize with others, and I think that's because you're self-aware, and so because you know that, you can then implant some of your knowledge and skills onto kids who aren't so self-aware and help them become more self-aware. An easy way to think about this is remember if you have little kids at home or babies, or if you've had babies and children, or if you know someone with a baby, um, i- adult humans, we do running commentaries on babies and the way we interact with them. Um, It's perfectly natural, and the reason why we do that is because it's built into our design. We're supposed to interact with babies in a babyish way. We make comments about what baby is holding, what baby is eating, how baby looks. If baby's upset, we tell them, "Oh gosh, you look upset today," and then we just do these running commentaries. There's a good reason for that. And the reason is because humans, we learn by mimicking what others do. Now, of course, kids with ASD, they struggle with that because, like I said before, all the information coming towards them is full blast, full bore. So it's very difficult for them to distinguish what's salient and what's not. But what we're doing with kids from an early stage is we are giving them the verbs, the words, the nouns, which are in fact just symbols and representations of the external world. They're concepts, which is within which is housed all this emotional experience that they then take with them into their later life. So, to try and illustrate, what does the word good mean? I'm sure that you can get the Webster's dictionary and read out what the definition of good means, right? It doesn't matter what language you speak. We all have this idea of what good means, um, and and we all have different experiences that then lends itself to the emotional valence of that word good. Um, Good is a symbol, it's a construct, it's a representation of the world around us. We have a way of understanding what good is. Because, as we're kids, over time, maybe our parents might have used words like good, oh, good boy, good girl for doing this and that. Anyway, we have to do this with kids so that they understand the world around them, right? Kids with ASD, they struggle with taking the external world and internalizing it in a way that is nuanced. Like I said before, things are very monochromic. So with kids with ASD, we have to help them to paint by numbers, regardless of age and stage. Um, we can't do it all at once. We have to drip feed this stuff over time, which was what we were frustrated with in the forensic services, because we would have loved to have worked with these kids over a long period of time, but it's very difficult because kids grow up and they leave services and they move on. Um, we have to capitalize on teachable moments. What do you do in practice? You do running commentaries. It sounds really simplistic, but it's not. It's not easy to do, and it's not always easy to catch kids in teachable moments. And usually, when we would catch them, is after a conflict of some sort. We would do a running commentary on how they were thinking and feeling at the time, what we think they were thinking and feeling at the time, and then we would allow them. We would invite them to then correct us. We would do empathy maps. Hey, Jordan, when you had that conflict with so and so, what were you thinking at that time? What were you feeling at that time? Which is different to how we used to do it, which was, oh, you did that to that guy. How do you think they were feeling? You robbed that store. How do you think they were feeling? That's fine. You can do that as well. But the key thing is to help them become more self-aware of what they were seeing, what they were hearing, what they were saying and doing, what they were thinking, and what they were feeling. And you can do that with your empathy map. Um, you don't have to collect all the necessary. There's so much information you can collect, but if you stick within those 5 corners, what they're seeing at the time, or I saw that guy standing behind the store, and he looked at me in a mean way, and then I thought, oh, he's not a nice guy, and so I felt like I needed to teach him a lesson, so I hit him in the face. Um, and then that gives you enough information to then start having a conversation more about what they were thinking and feeling at the time, and then you can start to correct some fundamental errors in what they were seeing, thinking, feeling, and hearing, rather than trying to get them to think what that shopkeeper was actually thinking and feeling. I hope that makes sense. Safe questions to ask are your 5 W's and H's, the who, the what's, the when's, the where. Uh, Actually, 4 W's and H's. I would stay away from why questions. I'm sure you teachers know why. So, uh, and what I mean is you ask those who, what, when, where, how questions pertaining to feelings and thinking. So, for example, what were you thinking when you saw the shopkeeper look at you in a mean way, in your words? What were you feeling when that shopkeeper did such and such a thing? Where were you when this happened? Who else were you with when this happened, for example? So empathy maps, um, you can download them on the internet, Pinterest, and good empathy maps will split up the page into sections. And those 5 sections are what someone is seeing, what someone is hearing, what someone is thinking, feeling, saying, and doing. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. And you have to make, you have to do running commentaries and labeling emotions for the young person during teachable moments. You have to drip feed this stuff. It's very difficult to do outside of the heat of the moment. Okay. The second principle that I wanted to share with you is that we need to set our expectations. We need to be realistic. Um, Kids with ASD, neuroatypical kids, don't easily grow out of this. It's very, I don't think it's impossible. A lot of kids that have ASD actually learn how to empathize very well. And what you notice is that those kids actually are more self-aware than other kids who are neuroatypical. So again, I think that's the key, and there's research to back that up. But we have to set our expectations straight. Kids with ASD, as you know, don't easily grow into this stuff. It takes time, and it takes a village. It takes parents, teachers, students to all be on the same page. Clinicians, we all have to be on the same page. And some of the barriers to this, speaks to cultural, subcultural forces in our homes, in our schools, and the broader political structures that we have to navigate. Like I said before, especially where policies don't quite support these sorts of practices and approaches. Um, but the thing that I do really like about this idea of helping kids in the moment in a drip fed sort of way by doing running commentaries is that you become the instrument. You become the instrument within the system that you work. And you don't have to have all kinds of resources at your disposal, because what you're doing is you're helping them in the moment, helping them to paint by numbers, each moment, moment by moment, teachable moments. You are the instrument. Help them be more self aware, help them to connect what they're thinking and feeling. So I'll give you a recent example. I had a young lady in my clinic about 2 weeks ago with ASD, and she would self injure whenever she couldn't make sense of what she was feeling, and she would self injure in order to let out emotions which were too difficult for her to tolerate. She was mislabeled with borderline personality disorder, but in reality, she has autistic spectrum disorder. Um, and in the room in front of me, we were talking about something that was inherently painful for her to talk about, and she dissociated, or what people would call dissociation. She blanked out. Actually, she wasn't dissociating. She was just lost for words. She just couldn't make sense of what she was feeling. But she looked confused. And so I did a running commentary. It's like, oh, you look puzzled. Um, and I would exaggerate that puzzled look. Um, and I believe that you have to exaggerate their facial expressions. It sounds a little bit naff, and it sounds a little bit like overly simplistic, but really this stuff does work. You have to exaggerate and mirror what they are feeling so they can see it for themselves. So then they know what puzzled looks like. Because if they're not self-aware, chances are they're not going to know what puzzlement looks like. So, oh man, look, I can't do it. Sorry. You look puzzled. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? We did a little empathy map. I didn't do it like a traditional empathy map, but I just asked her some, uh, what, when, where type questions as it pertained to her puzzlement. Um, anyway, as she didn't have a lot of words or language to describe how she was feeling, but she started to use those words, puzzled. Yes, I think I was puzzled. I was puzzled because of such and such an issue. Can't quite remember what the issue was, but so doing a running commentary is actually really, really helpful intervention. With young kids, it's very difficult. Don't get me wrong. I know it's very, very difficult, but it's not sufficient to help them in its entirety, of course, but it's necessary. And I think that's the key part. Again, help them become more self-aware, paint by numbers. In order to teach empathy, we have to be empathic ourselves, and we have to be self-aware um, of our own practices. Therefore, we have to make self-reflection a daily practice. Um, I would encourage anyone to do empathy maps on yourself. Um, I do it maybe once a week. I would reflect on my practice and think about how I was feeling, thinking, what I was saying, what I was hearing. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And what that does over time is it increases your patience. Interestingly, increases your patience with kids. If you're more self-aware, you can recognize why you're feeling certain things, why you're thinking certain things, and it's much easier to let things slide. And if you want to delve into this a bit deeper, like I said before, there's the practice of empathic discipline, which you're under no obligation to buy, of course, but for webinar attendees, there's a special offer for you, which will be popping into your email inboxes over the next day or two. And I'll leave a link here for you as well, so that you've got that if you want to check it out. So, look, I hope you found that helpful. I'll stop there because we're coming up to the 45-minute mark now, and I'll open the floor to questions. If people have questions, please stick that in the chat box, and and I'll answer them. No questions yet. That's okay. I'll wait a couple more minutes, and if if no one has any questions, I'll sign us all off. And for those of you who stayed till the end, so much for that. What I'm going to do is I'll send you a replay of this video, so that you've got this resource. I hope you found it helpful. I hope it made sense. Um, and Yeah, I'll send you some free stuff as well, some more free resources. And like I said before, if you do have any questions for me, and you forgot to ask them, um, please, if you go to YouTube, where I'll send you the link to this video, which will be unlisted. It won't be publicly available, but it will be available to those who attended. If you go into the comment section, which will be unviewable to people who don't have the link, type in your questions there, and then I'll answer them there. Or you can email me at hello at huddlewisdom.com, and I'll do my best to. Oh, okay, we got a question there. So the question is, when a child only says simple answers like yes, no, why, how do you encourage more depth? So sometimes when kids are lost for words, they are lost for words for a reason. What that reason is, of course, isn't entirely obvious to us just yet. So sometimes what I do is I start to make some curious inquiries. What do I mean by curious inquiries? So curious inquiries are essentially questions that I ask of the child, um, from their perspective. So, for example, um, I noticed that you don't you may or may not have a lot of words to explain how you're feeling right now. That's okay. I do ask a lot of questions, don't I, Jordan, or whoever. I'm sorry about that. Maybe I'm asking too many questions, and sometimes I know how that feels when I'm asked too many questions. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to give a full answer, um, or sometimes I just don't know the answer, and so I don't have too many words to say. Is that correct? Or sometimes I've not said a whole lot, and so it feels quite kind of unnatural for me to say more than what I've said in the past. Um, is that kind of true for you, Jordan? Um, so if kids don't have a whole lot of words to tell you, if they're just saying yes or no, or no why questions, you can make some curious inquiries, but um, try and make those curious inquiries from the perspective of how they might be feeling or thinking in that moment, rather than from what we're thinking or feeling. I hope that makes sense. Like I said before, kids with ASD struggle to understand how they're feeling or thinking. Um, so the more that we can color social pictures for them, or the more color we can put on their palette, over time, the better able that they're able to communicate. But if you're going to do this sort of work, um, perhaps when you're making curious inquiries, make sure that you're only using uh, certain words that you know that you're going to repeat over time, so they're not too confused. Uh, so, for example, um, for that young girl I was talking about before, who looked dissociated and she wouldn't even give me an answer at first, I would continually make curious inquiries. Hey, Sally, her name's not Sally. Sally, I just noticed that I'm asking you all these questions, and um, must feel like I'm just bombarding you with all these questions, and you're not answering me, or you're just giving me grunts or yeses and nos. That's okay. That is okay. Um, but you do look kind of puzzled. Um, I'm sorry if I am making you feel puzzled, but would love to try and understand. Um, what's causing that. Is that right? Are you feeling puzzled? And so I would just kind of repeat and repeat, you know, certain words that I know that I'm going to use over and over again. And then that word becomes part of their vocabulary. Um, and then hopefully the next time we meet, she might incorporate that into her language. Um, so the answers that she gives hopefully will not be just simple yes, no, why sorts of answers, if that makes sense. So curious inquiry from the perspective of the child. Um, you're not always going to get it right straight away. Really, I know that. Um, but persistence and perseverance does pay off over time. Um, and again, uh, you know, like I said before, um, it's not easy, but it does get easier over time. I hope that answers your question, Shona. Any more questions or anything that people want me to clarify? We've got about 7 minutes left on the clock for the session. Maybe I'll wait another couple of minutes if anyone has any more questions. Otherwise, I'll sign us off. Maybe I'll wait till 8:56. Um, in the meantime, uh, perhaps what I'll do is um, this is the email address that we use. um, so you can send your questions to that as well if you have any, um, or you can comment or post questions on any of the uh, social media platforms where you'll find us. We're on LinkedIn. We've also got uh, page on Instagram. Oh my gosh, Pinterest. Um, we've got another minute. Any more questions? Nope, doesn't seem to be any more questions. Okay. Well, hey, thank you so much, guys, for taking the time joining me this morning. Oh, thank you, thank you, Shona. That's a pleasure. Yeah, I like that analogy as well, and the kids like it as well. I think speaking in plain language seems to help them. Talking about painting by numbers also helps them to understand their own way of thinking. Uh, eh, yeah. Mm. Yes, it really is about getting back to basics. You know, because if you don't nail the basics, how do you nail the fancy stuff? And really, it's not the fancy stuff that gets the most leverage. It's the basic stuff. Those little pebbles can give you a lot of leverage. This big boulder is very difficult to get a fulcrum going. So it's the little stuff that you want to leverage. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you all. Um, and thank you for joining me. I'll send you a link to those people who have attended till the end for this video replay. Sorry, I'll send you a link to the video replay in case you want to rewatch it and listen to me drone on and on. Okay, all right. Be safe, everyone. I hope you're doing well and I hope you stay well. And yeah, I'll speak to you again in due course.